This is an introduction to Autodesk Maya. Maya is the industry standard tool for 3D graphics, for animation, 3D modeling. You might have heard of other 3D software like Blender, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, and if you've used any of this software, the general principles is going to be pretty similar. I'm going to go over this interface and kind of break it down. The actual basics are not too difficult to grasp. Maya is one of those softwares where you can really get into it. There's a lot of different tools. There's all kinds. It's a very powerful piece of software. But the actual basics are not that difficult to grasp. So I'm going to go over that first of all. So once I break it down, it'll be a little bit less scary. So at the top here, we have a menu. And these menus kind of contain almost everything that you could possibly need in the software. All kinds of settings you'll find in here. Mostly though we'll end up using the shelves underneath here, which actually contain shortcuts to most of these tools. These menu sets change depending on what menu set you're in, so depending on what drop down you're in. So if you're in animation, you'll see the shelf changes to give you different options. So the reason I tell you that now is if you're following a tutorial or something and this menu looks different, it's not a different version of Maya, it's just a different drop down menu. So mostly we're going to stay in 3D modeling. Under that we've got what's called the status line. Most of this again you don't need to know right now. There's options about rendering, and we'll get into rendering at a later point. Saving and undoing you can do here as well, as you can here. Save as, or opening new scenes or importing stuff, you can all do through there. So yeah, that's the status line. Under that we've got the shelves, as I discussed before, and these contain shortcuts for different workflows. So if you're modeling, you'll be in a shelf like this. Animation, different shelves for different things. So that's kind of the top half of the screen. So that's actually broken down. And on the left side of the screen, we have the toolbox. So this contains options for selecting. And if I hover my mouse over, you can also see there are shortcuts. So Q for the select tool, you can press as a shortcut for select. Now to show you how to select, I need to create an object. So let's create an object. In the poly modeling shelf, there are these things called the polygon primitives. These are kind of the basic building blocks of Maya, and you can build all kinds of shapes from these basic primitive shapes. So we've got a sphere, we've got a cube, we've got a cylinder. Just clicking on these will generate an object in the viewfinder. So I've created a sphere by doing that. And with my selection tool, I can deselect by clicking off the shape, and then clicking onto the shape, I can select it. Now this is the 3D viewport, and this shows you a preview of your scene. Rather than a rendered final image, it shows you a preview of what's going on. The first thing I need to show you is how to navigate the space in the viewport. So you can do that by holding Alt or Option and by left clicking. So hold down Alt first and then hold down your left click, and you can tumble or rotate around the scene. So that's tumbling. Alt or Option and then left click. To zoom in, it is Alt, Option, middle mouse button. So that's the scroll wheel. So hold Alt and then the middle mouse button down, and you can go up and down, left and right, and that is what's called a tracking movement. And then finally, right clicking and holding down Alt, you can zoom in and out. You can also use the scroll wheel without holding Alt to zoom in and out that way. So I want you to try that now. So hold down Alt or Option, left click to tumble around, middle mouse up and down, left and right, and right click for zooming in and out. So all you have to do, everything that you need for navigating the space is going to be that Alt button, holding that down and then using the mouse. So try that. Alt, left click, holding down Alt and left clicking, holding them both down at the same time. That tumbles. Middle mouse up and down, left and right, and then right clicking, zooming in and out. Once you've got a little bit of a feel for that, navigating that 3D space, we'll then look at some of these tools underneath. So these tools in the toolbox underneath, these are both selection tools. So there's a lasso tool, which you can use to select things. There's a paint tool to select. I'm not going to show you how to do that just yet, it's not so important. Let's go back to our normal selection tool. And you can also select objects as well as clicking on them. You can drag select, so you can hold your left click down and draw. Whatever you draw within this box is going to be selected. Okay, so the next thing we need to look at are these tools underneath. So under the selection tools, we've got this move tool, and you can use W as well as a shortcut for move. And when you click on that, when you've got an object selected and you've clicked on that move tool, you get these arrows come up. And this is how you move objects around in your scene. So by left clicking and holding down left click and holding down one of these arrows, you can move the object. So in 3D, we don't really tend to talk about up and down, left and right. We talk in different axes. So we've got the x-axis, which is this red one. And you can see there's a little compass down here, which helps you see. It's the x-axis, the z-axis, and the y-axis. That's up and down. And just using these three axes, you can move the object anywhere in 3D space. So get a feel for that. If I zoom around the scene, that also can help me placing an object. Keep moving the camera, because if you place the object in 3D space, you might think, oh, I've lined up with the grid, but because of perspective, as soon as I move the camera, you might think, oh, it's not in the corner of the grid. So keep moving the camera, that's going to help you place objects. You can move objects around just by holding down in the middle. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I'd use the arrows, because this is even more unpredictable when it comes to placing objects in 3D space. So again, you can hold it down by the middle, try and line it up. You might think I've lined up to the edge of the grid, but as soon as I move the camera, it's not in the right place. It's easier to use these arrows to try and get it in the right place. A little bit more predictable. So the tool under move is the rotate tool, and the shortcut for that is E. So what's called the gizmo changes a little bit. We get these rings, but it's fundamentally the same sort of thing. We can use that to rotate them. So holding down these rings, we can rotate. The ring on the outside actually rotates according to where the camera is. So it's a very specific tool, not all that useful generally. You want to use these rings on the inside. The last tool is the scale tool. And this is quite an important tool to get the hang of. The middle one scales evenly. These other tools are going to scale in one axis, so it's going to stretch the object. So bear that in mind. When you're scaling something up, it's much easier to scale from the middle if you want it to remain even than it is to scale in one specific axis. So that's the scale tool. So try and create some shapes and move things around. And you'll find that by combining shapes, you can quite easily begin to create different objects. So you can stretch objects. And with a bit of imagination, you can begin to think about how these objects can come together. So for example, I can create a tower just by using a cylinder and a cone. So I can select both of them and move them up to the top of the grid. But you can create quite interesting shapes just simply using these pieces like Lego blocks. So without actually having to do any complicated modelling, you can begin to create something a bit more interesting. To duplicate on Mac is Command D. So hold Command, then hit D, and then that will duplicate. If you want to rotate around an object, select the object and hit F. That will zoom in and you'll be rotating around it. So that's going to be quite useful. So as I say, Command D to duplicate, and you can move those objects around. And just by using these simple tools to create basic shapes and move them around, you can actually create all you really need. That's all you really need to know to create some quite interesting objects. it's all about thinking about how these simple shapes can come together. So for example, a cylinder can be a tube of Pringles, it can be a tower, it could be a spear with a bit of work. So thinking about how these basic shapes can be used to create objects within the real world, and break objects down, anything that you're trying to create, into those basic shapes. So for example, this cylinder could easily become a chair leg. I could use a cube for the top of the cube, for the top of the chair or table. So just by using these simple shapes, I want you to have a go and see what you can come up with. Perhaps you could build a little tower or a castle or a table and chairs. So have a little go, see what you can come up with. So the next thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is tools. So if I go to the modelling toolkit, that is this little tab on the right. This contains a whole load of stuff that's useful for 3D modelling, so beginning to create 3D models. So for example, we have a bevel tool here. If I have an object like a cube selected and I click bevel, you can see that it rounds off the edges of this tabletop. And you've got a little pop-up where you can change the fraction or how much it's doing that. And you can change the segments. So you can see what that's doing. It's creating more segments and rounding it off more smoothly. Don't add too many segments or you will freeze your computer. And that brings us nicely on to polygons. So everything in 3D space is made of these flat polygons. These are flat 2D shapes that come together to form a 3D object. So they fit together almost like origami, and you can kind of see how that comes together. Everything we've been doing up to this point has been in object mode, where the object is displayed green. And what that means is, no matter how much we stretch and move around that object, anything we do to it is being applied to the whole shape, which means a cube will always essentially be a kind of an oblong shape. You're never really going to stretch it or change its shape fundamentally, if that makes sense. If we want to change its shape more significantly, we need to select individual parts of that cube. Stretching it, scaling it, rotating it, they're not going to really change it from a cube kind of shape into a different shape. So we need to select just a part of that shape. And it's easier to show than to explain, so that's what I'm going to do. So in that modelling toolkit, you can see this is object mode at the moment, but we can move into a component mode. So this, for example, is face mode. The object is now displayed blue, which means we're in a component mode. And if we hover the mouse over, we can see that we can select just separate parts of that cube. So we can select just one face of that cube. We can rotate those parts, scale them. And now we can end up with something that's fundamentally quite different from a cube. So the face is the largest component of the shape. That's the actual polygon you're selecting, that 2D flat shape that the 3D object is made up of. Each of these faces have edges, and we can also select the edges and select those. That's a smaller component. And finally, those edges also have vertices or points at each end. So that's the smallest component. That's just how the edge decides on where to go. The edges are joined up between those 2 points. So you can't scale that point. It's simply an area of 3D space that edge goes from one point to the other like a dot to dot, if that makes sense. I don't want to overwhelm you with information. You can really get into this, but you can also just kind of think creatively and see what you can come up with. So don't worry too much about the theory. So let's go back to object mode. I'll do that here. So I'm going to show you one more tool, and then I'm going to let you go away and have a bit more experimentation, see what you come up with. The best way to get the hang of this is just to practice, just to play around, be experimental, be creative, and see what you can come up with. And those technical skills will just slowly develop over time. If you're struggling, do let me know though, and I can help. So let's go to. I'm going to show you one tool that I think is really useful, and that is the extrude tool. We've already looked at the bevel tool. I'm going to show you one more tool before I head off. So what we're going to do is we are going to go into face mode, and I'm going to select the top face, and I can move this around, and that can flatten or extend the object. I'm going to push it right down. So I'm going to build a tower, and I encourage you to have a go at this. It can be quite a little bit of a tricky thing to get the hang of, the extrude tool, but once you do, it's a very, very powerful tool. So I'm going to hit extrude, and what the extrude does, it's taken that face that I have selected, and it's kind of extended that. So I now have another face pulled out of that one face, which means I can scale that in a different direction and create a bit more of a complex object. I'm going to build a tower using this. So now I have this face selected, I can extrude again. And I'm going to just push it up. I'm not going to change the direction. But I want now to go in, so I'm going to hit extrude again. So every time you change direction, you are clicking extrude, if that makes sense. So you're pulling out another face, kind of unfolding it. So I'm going to go straight up now for my tower. So this is formed as the base of my tower. So obviously I'm making a tower, but this could be a chair leg, it could be a candlestick, it could be all kinds of things really. Anything kind of man-made, like a pillar that has that kind of architectural feel to it. I'm now going to change direction. I'm going to come out. This is going to be the top of the tower. And I'm going to go up now. And I want to change direction. I want to bring it out. So I'm going to click extrude again. Go to scale. And you notice how I'm scaling. I'm not scaling in one direction. I'm scaling from the middle. So it's evenly expanding. If you do it this way, it's a bit fiddly to make sure that it's all even. So it's easier to do it this way. Go up a tiny bit. You can see that it kind of begins to break if it's like that. So you want to push it up a little bit because the face underneath is pushing through. So let's push up again. I hope that makes sense. Extrude again. Go up. And this time I'm going to pinch it right in. So I'm going to take it the middle bit and pull it right in to scale up that top face. So now I'm beginning to get that tower look that I want. I'm going to extrude again. And the reason is I'm changing direction now. I want it to taper so that it comes to a point faster at the top, if that makes sense. So rather than an even line, I want to make it more steep as it gets to the top. I just think that looks more interesting. Now I could stop here, but I'm going to actually go a little bit further. I'm going to extrude that face, and I'm going to go up to create kind of a little flagpole at the top of my tower. Might go in a bit more before I extrude it one last time. This is creating a bit of a spire. And if I extrude again, I could bring it out and then back in again and create a bit of a spearhead on the top of the flagpole. That will do. So go back to object mode. That exits the extrude. So now I just need a flag on top of the tower. So I can go back to face mode, so it goes blue, which means I can select a face. I'm going to select this face, and I'm going to extrude this face for my flag. So I'm going to click extrude and pull out that face. So I'm just extending it out. I'm going to squash it down a bit. I'm going to go to move tool and push it down a bit. I'm going to extrude again. Oh, lost it. Extrude again. And once again I'm going to push it down. Squash it down a bit. Extrude one more time. Kind of like it like that. Maybe a bit more that way. Extrude one last time. a nice little point at the end. Okay, so that's my tower. I don't have to stop there. I can go to edge mode and keep adding detail this way. So I can extrude this face, scale it right down. And what you're going to see that I'm going to do, I'm going to extrude one more time. Actually, I'm going to go back. So back, doing Control Z. I'm going to reselect that face, 1 second. Extrude. If I hit extrude and then I accidentally click away, don't go back and click at the extrude tool again. That extrusion is still there. It's still there if you see. I'm going to push out. You don't want to click extrude again if you do that. Like if you click extrude and then accidentally click off it. You don't want to click extrude again, or you're going to be stacking extruded faces on top of each other, if that makes sense. Again, if this doesn't all make sense at the moment, don't worry, it shouldn't at this stage. So that's my little window. So I could keep on adding detail. I'm going to leave it there. You could have a go following exactly what I did, or just have a go with the extrude tool, have a go with the bevel tool, try and create some shapes, try and get creative with it. I am going to leave it there. Hopefully that was helpful. Again, if you have any problems, make sure you message me. Keep practicing and you will improve. You'll be surprised at how quickly you improve, even if you just put aside half an hour every day to have a little practice. I will see you later.